Hi. So this is a talk that I'm so excited to give to this community because this is my community. And in many ways, it's a topic that I've been thinking about or have been thinking about in some capacity probably for over a decade now and didn't really know where to put it. And I think it took doing some of the things I've done to really, and then spending some time to reflect on it, and then kind of the confluence of where we are in tech now to kind of land on this talk that I'm about to give. Um, so I got into computing. I learned how to code when I was 18. And my first language was Pascal. It's this totally obscure language. My high school didn't really have a whole lot of things like AP classes or programming languages, and I had a teacher that taught Pascal. And I remember this moment where our first program was to build a cash register, which sounds really silly, but I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I can tell a computer what to do, and I can write a few lines of code, and it prints out the thing that you see when you go to the grocery store, and it prints out receipts, and this is how things happen. I can write a few lines of code, and things just happen. And in this case, it was a silly receipt program. But that kind of charted me on this journey where I saw the power in writing some code to do something. Which brought me to all these things. This is kind of, for me, it's a totally cluttered slide because it kind of feels to me how my life and career has been. It's been totally all over the place. It started out as an associate product manager at Google working on Google Health up in that corner there. Google Health was sunset because it didn't understand its users, in my opinion, and for the most part weren't really solving the problem of personal health records. And I'll touch more on that in a little bit of what it's like when you go into a field like healthcare, like personal health records, and perhaps don't understand deeply enough the community that you're building for. And also, you can say there's also timeliness and a number of other things too. Then I also spent some time doing something called capacity planning on the search team. And what that means ultimately is you determine which kinds of machines are deployed for which services in search. So one example that we would use is, let's say you had two scenarios. One is you're searching for the conversion of pounds to ounces. And another is you're trying to get the real-time results for the Women's World Cup Championship. They're both two different things, and one is very static and one is not. So where you store that information really, really matters because one, you don't have to really update for a while, whereas the other one, people might need that information in real time. And that also really got me thinking about how decisions as small as, not really small, but how decisions to where we store our data and how we store our data, how that also impacts the end user experience. So table that away as well. And then for fun, I had a partner and I worked on something using this open source tool to build a sentiment analysis of Twitter back in 2009, which is, I remember reflecting on it recently. I'm like, I can't believe we did that in 2009. But we just used this open source machine learning sentiment analysis thing to just figure out how Twitter feels about a word. And that's what we came up with. And at the same time, I remember people were so excited about what we made. No one questioned what algorithm we used. No one questioned what was in the sentiment analysis tool. They just thought it was really cool. Again, also store that away as how people perceive things when you deliver them cool things. And then also spent some time building flight simulation software in my early days, probably when I was still an undergrad, testing flight simulation software and also thinking to myself, wow, I'm like 18 and testing these flight simulation software that are going to go in really big airplanes. And many of you who have been following the Boeing situation, much of that is also a software issue. And again, seeing how these decisions that go into the product development cycle fit into something really, really big. And finally, that last little bit in the corner, in the bottom right-hand corner, was when I left Google in 2014 to go work for the United States Digital Service, which is a tech startup inside the White House under President Obama, just tasked with building better services for the public. Some of my colleagues worked on the healthcare.gov rescue. There was a talk in 2015 here at Mind the Product with Dana Chisnell that talked about some of the healthcare.gov stuff. And the idea there is you have doctors trying to use that pink and white interface to take care of spinal cord injury patients. And what ended up happening was now you had patient data stored in a bunch of Excel spreadsheets or Access databases sent across multiple hospitals around the country, sometimes in different parts of the world. And patients just weren't getting the care they needed, or their records were lost, or any number of scenarios that made it so doctors weren't able to provide care for these patients that really, really needed the care the most. So that was after about all of that up here was probably after about some 15 years of doing some kind of tech product work. I had built product teams of 40 people, managed product teams, worked with engineers, and a number of things, and was I need to think about all of this somewhere because things are happening. And then right around then, we had Cambridge Analytica happen. We had cases where third-party apps were using data in ways that we were unintended. A lot of folks were doing a lot of different kinds of research, and I'll go to that in a little bit. And really thought about how failed or poorly designed services can lead to issues sometimes of human rights, justice, ethical concerns. Sometimes our tools are just, I couldn't see a photo of a cat, but sometimes the same tool causes a life or death scenario. It causes a propagation of news that is not accurate and causes a cascading effect. And I'm okay, I have to think more about this. What can we do as product folks, right? We say that we're the ones that own the entire product life cycle. We say that we're the ones that bring everyone to the table and figure out what features we should build, and that we really advocate for the users, and we figure out the market fit, and we're like the person that figures out what gets out the door, and we find the right thing to build. So how do we do this? A year ago on this stage, Mariah Hay, I guess the first ethics society conversation at Mind the Product, had everyone in the room take the oath. And I put it back up here because I think it's fun to reference other Mind the Product talks. And also it's a great thing. She said, she had the room repeat, I will be 200% accountable. And what that meant was to yourself, but also to your users. So when users use our product, we no longer say, sorry, I built the platform, I built the product, not my fault that it's used in any number of ways, whether it's a doctor that can't figure out how to use the interface and overprescribes medication, or whether it's someone that uses the platform to propagate something. We should no longer say that, but we should take some kind of accountability somewhere. And how we define that is up for debate, but we take some kind of accountability. Know your blind spots, so figure out what blind spots, so who's not in the room, what we don't see, build a framework for really understanding our blind spots, and then not allow your product to be weaponized. That was the oath that, and I put that up there because I want to build on that and talk more about that, and talk more about how I think we can do better at that. Today's roadmap in the next 20 minutes. I want to do some reflection, do some case studies and examples, and then talk about a few action items. And to do that, I have a few key takeaways I hope you take away from today. One, tech ethics is not new. There's a lot of buzz around ethics and AI and ethics and tech and society, and it's not new. The idea of ethics isn't new. There's fields and studies, I've been thinking about this for a long time. There's a lot of power that exists with the builders. And what I mean by that is, of course, leadership matters. Of course, you have shareholders and you have VCs and there's hierarchy, et cetera. But there's so much power that exists in the people who are on the ground doing the work, whether it's the engineers building the code with their fingers on the keyboard, or the product manager determining what kind of testing you're going to do, what kind of users you're going to bring into the room. There's a lot of power in all of you and all of us, and the people who put the pieces together. And the third one is probably the most important piece for me. We have to honor expertise. And I'll go more into what that means across disciplines and across experiences. So tech ethics is not new. In the classroom alone, Casey Fiesler, this is primarily CS curriculum, but in the classroom, she got tired of people saying, nobody teaches ethics. And actually, there are some 188 universities and 197 courses that, just in this list alone, it's just a totally crowdsourced list, of places that have taught ethics around the world. And so clearly there's something that we might be missing. So it's not new. But if you look at, so CS is the world I come from. If you look at the computer science curriculum, you have these core classes that are the real classes. You have programming and theory. You have devices, intelligence. If you look at the side of the screen that has the icons, this is my, my alma mater. You can either specialize in devices, intelligence, media, modeling, or people, system, architecture, and theory. And people is its own standalone side thing that you can study. And there's a lot more we can do to integrate the people and human and user experience aspect into everything we do. And that's going to be the core tenet of, I think, how to think about this kind of work. So there's a responsible computer science challenge. I'll gloss over this. But in the CS world, there's at least 17 universities are being funded now to retrain and reteach computer scientists and engineers and interweave social responsibility and ethics into the computer science curriculum. In industry, it's also not new. I started going down like this rabbit hole when I start thinking about all these ethical issues that we've had throughout time in the history of just maybe tech alone. You have cases where Yahoo released information to governments. You have people who've grappled with implications of building the atomic bomb. You have cases of car companies saying airbags don't matter, nobody wants them, and then ultimately they did matter. If you follow Formula One racing, which I'm really into, you have cases where everyone was like, no, it's fun for the sport, for the drivers to not have protective gear and the cars to not be as safe. Turns out it's not, and it took a lot of engineers and drivers really fighting for the whole sport to change. And now, instead of a driver or two dying every single season in Formula One, that doesn't happen anymore. So it's not new. But there are so many issues that have now come up. These are just a few, right? Many of you may be familiar with Joy's work at the MIT Media Lab, where her face was not recognized. This study is a few years old now, until she put on a white mask, and then the algorithm recognized her face. We have cases of algorithm used in governments that are biased. You have, again, that pink and white screen where doctors can't figure out how to use it and they can't serve patients. You have thermostats that help with domestic abuse. You have the Ethiopian airline situation with Boeing. There are countless situations that come up where we can do better with understanding our communities, understanding our users, or doing better testing. So I'll jump from that to how power exists with the builders. The builders being us in the room, the product people, the product managers, the engineers, and the people who empower the engineers. These are all the pieces of a car. You have tires, you have steering wheels, car seats, etc. We're the ones that bring it all together, right? We figure out, there are people who design and do that, but we ultimately, at the end of the day, we make sure the car drives and serves the purpose of what we're trying to build for, which is a thing that drives to get you from one place to another. It's not to build a shiny, pretty car. It's to figure out how to make the car drive. That's our role as product people. We make sure the goal of what it is we're going to build gets done. Similarly, it's the same thing with code and development, right? So this, for me, is kind of like the same as this, but for something like a spam filter. You figure out which language you're going to use. You figure out which kinds of classifiers you're going to do. You figure out where to store the data in the servers. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, you have a spam algorithm that determines what is spam and what is not spam. And similar to this, if you don't put all the pieces together right, at best, the car might not drive. At worst, it might not drive well, and it might end up hurting someone. So I bring this up because there are so many pieces that come together when you're building a product, and all those little decisions really, really matter. And the product person is the person that we have our finger on all those tiny little decisions, on which language to use. Of course, we're working with our tech leads, et cetera, but we make all these little decisions that build up to this big product that we launch. And all those little decisions really matter, and we have so much power in what we build. One of my colleagues at Mozilla has something, you should look it up, it's at Sundance, It's called Stealing Your Feelings, and he does it kind of as a parody of all these tools that exist out there. And in 2014, some of you may know him, Alex Young, put out this thing that was like, I know how to predict how smart people are, because the smart people listen to Radiohead and the dumb people listen to Beyonce, according to this rigorous tech study. And it wrote like this whole algorithm to predict smart people based on IQ and et cetera. And then Noah did a parody of that and wrote some code to kind of highlight how we laugh at this and it's so ridiculous. But if you look at even just how you code something like this, everything from like the variables you choose, the variable names you choose, the variable types you choose, the parameters you put in like your if statements, like if IQ is greater than X number, or let's bring it back to another example I used earlier. If number of prison sentence is greater than a certain number, then you make a decision. These are engineers and product people making these kinds of decisions. If we don't bring in the people who actually understand these numbers and what they really mean, we end up with things like this that seemingly don't make a whole lot of sense, but might end up affecting someone's life because someone may take studies like this more seriously. So what's the product role here? Like, what can product people do? These are just a few things that we all talk about, right? We do sprints, we talk about metrics, we talk about user experience, talk about having a community perspective, accessibility, scaling, testing, disaster response, postmortems, managing stakeholders, et cetera. There's so much we can do in each one of this, and the list goes on all the things that we deal with as product managers. Think differently about how we do our sprints. Who do we bring into the room? What kinds of questions we ask in our sprint? How we do our stand-ups? What kind of questions are we asking in our stand-ups? Are we asking about societal impacts of our product? Are we thinking about what might go wrong in our daily stand-ups? How can we ask different kinds of questions throughout our sprints? When we're thinking about metrics, many of us know the term vanity metrics, which are, we shouldn't only care about daily active users, and we shouldn't only care about engagement. But what kinds of metrics should we really be thinking about? In one of my classes, we use the example of like the bike sharing service, and we start out with like, what kind of metrics would you track for success? And there's like the usual, how many people get on the bikes, at what time of day, and then you start digging, and people start asking questions about, how do you track if the bikes are disrupting people on the sidewalk who are trying to walk or in wheelchairs? Or like, what does success even really mean? Are they disrupting local public transit? And you start going deeper with your metrics. And there are a lot of ways to think about metrics differently to take into societal concerns. User experience and community perspective. That was a big theme today with Trisha and then Steve, and then later Elizabeth and Teresa. How do we think about bringing users into the room, not just bringing people in for a couple of questions and tracking their eye on how they're using our product, but how do we deeply go and understand an entire user's ecosystem, what kind of internet access they have, how do they get on the internet, what their day looks like, how they use your product, what their government looks like, what their political climate is like, and how that affects the use of your product. To go and deeply, deeply understand the community perspective. And then we have scaling and testing and disaster response and postmortems. I'll just go into a few of those. When we're testing, if we're going to use A/B testing, for example, I had this case where I was explaining, or we were just brainstorming A/B testing with someone, because they're like, oh yeah, we just do A/B testing. And they kind of talked themselves around about A/B testing, I think in the Boeing case for a while, and they're like, oh, well, you should just release software and like different airplanes and test them. And you're like, well, who gets which test? And they're like, oh, I don't know. And then you're like, and then you go into, well, if you now are saying, well, this population gets this test and this other population gets this version, and one is less secure, like, what are the implications of that? And so even with A/B testing, what kind of versions are you giving different groups? And now are you disadvantaging one group over the other? With the type of testing we do. And even if with testing, it's not enough to just do like a quick user interface testing. Do we deeply go and figure out, is our product really solving the problem that people need? So at least in the public sector, it was, are people able to sign up for a visa? Are people able to get health care? Is someone able to sign up for food stamps? Or do you just have an interface where you're able to collect data and you call that done? So to really understand testing, and then doing postmortems and doing disaster response. But think about disaster response not just in like the traditional site reliability engineering, a system came down, we brought it back up, but disaster response in a, oh crap, someone used our product in a totally crazy way, and it might not be what we wanted. So do we have a team in the same way that we do disaster response to look at that? And because we can't predict everything, but do we have a team that can turn around and say, oh, we have a way to think about this and fix it, and not to say, not our problem, sorry, we didn't really plan for it. Because we don't do that with security. If we have an exploit, we put a whole team on it. So we say we empower all the people. So think about all the people we can bring into the room and all the stakeholders that we can work with to think about our products in a much deeper manner and bring in perspectives that we might not necessarily bring in. And that brings me to the final point of honoring expertise. We've gotten away, thankfully in my opinion, not everyone, but from the days of every PM needs a CS background. That's kind of silly. And I think the product role is a ripe role for bringing in so many different perspectives. People with anthropology backgrounds, critical race and gender studies, data science, history, human rights, law, philosophy, political science, science technology studies, STS, sociology, and so much more. And also people with ranging from lived experience to industry experience to academic studies. It's so important for us to honor the expertise of people who've been thinking about technology and society for a very, very long time. People who really understand how information is spread around the world, for example. Maybe not in like the tech context, but they really, really understand how people share and exchange information. Or people who deeply understand how governments operate. And maybe, again, not understand how to apply tech to it, and that's our role, right? We bring these people in, and we're like, just tell me everything you know about how people communicate, or tell me everything you know about how a community of immigrants try to sign up for services or something, and then it's our job to pair that back with the technology and figure out how to fix it. But bring all these perspectives into the room. There are all these experts that we can bring in that I don't think we do enough of a job to bring in. I'm going to use 2 examples to talk about honoring expertise. So I run this ethical tech working group at the Berkman Klein Center, and on occasion we'll just have some friends come by who work in various industry, probably many of the ones you work as well, and just like, I have an idea that I want to do, but I just want to run it by a couple of folks. So one idea was this person worked for, to keep it anonymous, a gig economy company, and we're like, you know what? Our users are saying they don't always feel safe, so we want to figure out how to give them a safety score, and we'll, based on the safety score, they can determine if they want to go to that area or not. And I'm going to use Street View and to help me determine if the area is safe. And we're like, what are some of the issues? And it started out with a couple of folks, well, Street View doesn't always get updated, so you might just have old photos. And that's not accurate, so that's not really right. And then you start pushing it, and because in the room we had race and gender scholars, lawyers, political scientists, software engineers, computer scientists, et cetera, the conversation started going into, well, have you heard of the broken windows theory? It's the theory that you can go and judge a neighborhood by the number of broken windows you see. There's a lot of holes in the broken windows theory. And what that looks like, so you can't really determine safety based on that. And then another woman, Jasmine, at the University of Florida, was like, but then safety for whom? And I think that really honed the point in for this engineer. Some people might feel safe in that first photo and not safe in that second neighborhood. And some people might feel safe in the first neighborhood, not so safe in the second neighborhood. So safety for whom, and how are you going to determine what safety is? And within 10 minutes, just help this person think more critically about using Street View as a way to determine safety. So we have to honor expertise of all. It took having just all these different perspectives in like a safe space environment just to kind of poke holes in this idea of using Street View to determine safety for your users. So honor your expertise. Another example that I really want to use, I know there are folks from Airbnb here, but I really admire this example. So you have Airbnb. Many of you know there were trending hashtags like Airbnb while Black, Airbnb while Asian, with discrimination issues at Airbnb. So what was Airbnb's response? They're like, oh, you know what? We don't really know the fix internally. We're going to hire Laura Murphy, who was formerly director at the ACLU. And she interviewed some people. She talked to like a lot of the hosts. She talked to victims of discrimination. She talked to employees, civil rights organizations, federal and state regulatory agencies, elected and appointed officials, travel and tourism executives. There's no reason why product managers can't also talk to these people and do that as well. But they brought in someone who really was an expert, so they honored her expertise. And what they came up with is this. This is public on their blog. But the part that I really want to point out to this team, or this community, is one of the changes they made is to build a permanent and full-time product team to fight bias and promote diversity. It wasn't a put a team in law, put a team in put a team in like some diversity people ops org. This was a product team with product managers, designers, and engineers to focus on these topics. They're weaved into the team and the work every single day. Then there were other things on there too, like product decisions, like encouraging instant bookings and seeing how that can help, and changing how they hire and recruit, et cetera. But I think how they built out their product team was really, really, really important. So a couple things. These are just some starting material. But if you're interested in just reading more about just different ways many of our products have had different kinds of impacts in society, there's Joy's Algorithmic Justice League at the Media Lab. There's an initiative called More Than Code, where they talked to several hundred practitioners just about different societal impacts of code. And then there are these awesome books that some of you have probably already seen. Automating Inequality by Virginia Eubanks, Weapons of Math Destruction by Kathy O'Neill, Algorithms of Oppression by Sophia Noble, Geek Heresy by Kentaro, Ghost Work, which just came out by my colleague Mary Gray, and her co-writer Siddharth Suri, Artificial Unintelligence and Technically Wrong. These are just starting. There's so many more resources. These are really interesting stories to read or books to read about ways that our products really have, in some ways, propagated harms or just even had unintended consequences when we thought we were doing good things. So honor expertise across different disciplines and across different kinds of experiences. And again, I'll leave you with these 3 points. Tech ethics is not new. There are different people, communities, groups, disciplines that have thought about tech ethics for a long time. There's a lot of power with the people who build the products. And honor expertise. Thank you.